Well, good afternoon and welcome to your first all-women's panel. And also welcome to our discussion today on culture as a bedrock of Bengaluru, a city of the future. And it's wonderful to be discussing culture and the city, because very rarely do we look at culture as the defining prism through which to either view or develop or promote a city. And I think one of the reasons is perhaps that we are yet to comprehend the potential of the cultural wealth that we inherited as a nation. And we have seen cities across the world flourish and thrive because they have recognized the wisdom of developing their identity as cultural centers. So if you look across the world, you can see Florence, Sevilla, London, Paris, Cairo. So citizens from all across the globe flocking there to experience what they have to offer. But let's not spend any more time talking about what could have been, but rather at what we can do to recognize the cultural capital of this city and how we can best develop it for Bengaluru's communities and for the world at large. So I'm going to begin with you, Arundhati, because you have spent a lot of time in the city, and especially through your work, exploring the multiple layers that constitute culture. That could be the various communities that make up the city, the different religions, traditions, practices, language, and a whole myriad factors. But how do we best sort of bring all this together in a way that is unique to this city and creates a recognizable cultural ecosystem?
Thanks, Kamini, for that question. Actually, it's the city that we inhabit, a city that I made my home over 2 decades ago. It's fantastic that the city comes with huge cultural treasures, be it theater, be it film, be it music, literature. It's all here in the city. But if you had someone today visit you in Bangalore and you wanted to take them to a place where over an afternoon you could actually show them what this city has been culturally, there is no place to go. There is no museum of Bangalore, the city, with everything that it has for all of us. What you asked, Kamini, that culture is constituted by the various cultural spaces that we have, and we have a whole number of them. You look at Rankashankara, Jagriti, you look at Bangalore International Center, or you look at the numerous places that artists themselves have created, like the One Shanti Road, Jaga, the museums that MAP and IME that the two of you run, the science gallery that is going to come up that you're running already. But it still seems very fragmented. It seems all over the place. Bangalore has numerous festivals, both religious and cultural, habbas, various kinds of places and rituals and practices that bring communities and people together. But again, they seem fragmented across Cantonment, across JP Nagar, across Majestic. So I have often wondered whether it would be possible, A, to have a permanent place like a city museum, which could probably bring together not just the past, cultural past, historical past of the city, but also its many, many contemporary identities, which are all very different from each other. I think that's the beauty of Bangalore. Not to have one single idea of what this is, what this city is, but the kaleidoscope of the many visions of this city, the many futures that are possible, because many of us live here with our many kinds of cultural identities. I'm a Bengali from West Bengal, but I'm also a Bangalorean by choice, and this Nama Bengaluru is my home now. So these are the kind of hybrid cultures also that Bangalore enhances. And this permanent place could be one space where all these stories could be talked about. That's one. And the second thing that I have felt is inviting each other to other people's cultures could also be a way to create some kind of give and take and integration. So when in the month of Ramzan, when one sees the mosque road fill up with food shops on either side, that is a place maybe for many of us who do not practice that faith to come there and see what the culture is. So this is a beautiful thing. Some of the masjids in Bangalore, they started open houses where you could go one evening and spend a whole afternoon, evening, understanding the various kinds of cultural contributions that Islamic civilizations have made to us. On the other hand, when there are night-long habbas happening, many of us from outside of Bangalore who don't understand the meanings of these habbas don't go. But probably there's a way to engage in the culture of the other. And in Bangalore, it is so easy to do. You have Christmas and Ramzan and Durga Puja together in this city. What more could we ask for? But it is for us to participate, I think, in each other's cultural heritages also that's going to make that particular vision of cultural Bangalore come alive.
Yeah. You know, it's really exciting to see how the cultural landscape of Bangalore is slowly transforming in an institutional sense as well. And Manasi, you belong to that museum world as well, where we're seeing new museums being set up in the city. And that's really exciting for all of us. So I want you to really talk about how the museum space can be a center, a cultural center for people, and what we're doing to kind of invigorate that whole cultural identity for Bangalore.
Thanks, Kamini. And first of all, it's so nice to be on a panel of power women. And I think if there's one thing that defines the culture of Bangalore, it's there are a lot of power women involved in the arts, and I think that's what makes us special. You can give us a round of applause for that. Is Bangalore a cultural city? Vehemently, yes. Bangalore is a city that has a unique culture in many ways. We throw around this word cosmopolitan culture a lot. Certainly, that's something that defines Bangalore. It has a very rich history in the arts, and it is one of those cities that, even though is galloping fast into the future, continues to retain those ties with culture, heritage, with its tradition of performing arts, both traditional as well as contemporary. If you look at the cultural ecosystem of any city, for that matter, there are a lot of constituents, right? There are the creators of culture. That could be, musicians, artists, people who are making culture happen. There are consumers of culture. There are audience, people who are learning the arts. There could be, people who are consumers of culture. And then, what brings this ecosystem together is spaces for the arts. One of the things that irks me a lot, Kamini, and I'm sure it's something that you will confront as well, is the fact that whenever, like Arundhati was saying, when you bring someone to the city and they'll be like, "Arey yaar, Bengaluru yenu illa madakke. Yenide madakke Bengaluru mall hogbek, pub hogbek ashte. Where is the culture in the city?" My friend, there is a lot of culture that happens in Bangalore on a daily basis. I don't think we as Bangaloreans are engaging with culture actively enough. There are a dime a dozen small and large performance centers. There are museums in the city of excellent standards. The Indian Music Experience, which I have been fortunate to be part of the setting up of, or be it MAP or Science Gallery and these new spaces that are coming up. There are so many spaces for culture that are in the city. And yet, why is it that every time somebody comes to the city, we are saying there's no place to take people? Are we as citizens engaging? Are we finding out where is this culture happening in the city? When was the last time that many of us opened the newspaper to see what concerts are happening in the city? Are we engaging with culture actively enough? Is the question that I wanted to pose, because it's very easy to say the government needs to do this, somebody else needs to do this, but we are active participants in this cultural ecosystem of the city. And yes, in order to make culture thrive and flourish, spaces for culture are very important. And these could be, as I say, traditional concert halls, be it Chaudhaya Memorial Hall, Bangalore Gayan Samaja, these kind of spaces. It could be new spaces for culture, such as the Indian Music Experience Museum, whose entire reason for being is to make culture more inclusive to those who have been outside the space traditionally. So while I do say that Bangalore has all the ingredients that is needed to be a thriving cultural city, I think what we need is a lot more engagement between these different constituents of culture, the institutions, the creators, the audiences, and yes, people who support the arts. And it's only when all of these can come together that we can truly say that Bangalore is a cultural city.
Yeah, Manasi. I think Manasi has raised an important point that we were all just talking about. There are several stakeholders that play their role, but what is the role of the citizen? If you have to look at developing culture within a city, it takes both the institution, the artist, and the consumer to come together. So it's only when that happens that we can, as I say, dance together and create something beautiful together. But we are living in we always heard these phrases, the IT capital of the country, the Silicon Valley. So I think as people in the art world, we have this huge resource in the city that how do we tap into this? And MAP actually started unusually as a digital platform rather than as a physical space. And that, of course, is because we were pushed into it. Because the pandemic happened and we were planning on opening the physical space and we just couldn't. So we thought, how do we reach out to our audiences? And that's when we said, okay, let's open as a digital-first museum. But that's rarely the way it works out. It's usually the physical space and then the digital museum. But it helped us realize just how important the whole technology aspect of the experiences or the virtual world is. And if you want to reach out to the wider audience and the audience of the future, then you have to speak the language of the digital native. And that's how we developed at MAP the concept of MAP Labs, which really looks at the intersection of art and technology. And how do we use technology to create solutions for art? And so I'm really going to come to you here, Jahnavi, because we are all eagerly awaiting for the Science Gallery to open. So how do you see this marriage between art and technology, and how are we using technology to enhance that experience for our visitors?
Thank you. So yeah, I'm just as eagerly waiting for the space to open. So, thanks, Kamini, for that question. I think, let me start by saying, before I come more specifically to how we look at the convergence of art, creative expression, culture, knowledge, and what that might mean for a public space. What do we have public spaces for, right? I mean, we at various moments, there's an ebb and flow of saying, who is responsible, how do we generate it, etc. And there are times when, we call on different institutions, including the government, to step in, etc. But what are public spaces for? What are cultural institutions for? And I think at the end of the day, what we try to do through these spaces is build lives or build a life for the mind, right? While fundamental problems that need to be resolved in order to have a better society, a better life, are of course very much there. We work on them. But at the end of the day, what are we doing these for? So what do we ensure good education for? What do we ensure that there is no hunger for? Meaning, in a sense, taking care of these fundamental problems like inequality, like poverty, like lack of access to education, like access to sport. At the end of the day, once we've had all of this, then what? Right? And that is when the public spaces really come into play, because they are there to create a life of the mind. And I think that is the work that we do, that is the work that we engage in, and that is why, it is very important to look at these spaces as investments for the future, because in many ways, these are the spaces through which you socialize your next generations into becoming better citizens, right? In order to understand the life and the mind of another. I mean, why do we encourage, for example, or why have we been looking at literature? Is to understand and to get a window into a world that's not your own, or a life that's not your own. And that allows you to create an empathy for the people around you, the world around you, the difference around you, all a range of things, right? So I think this is the work that we are engaged in, and then we bring various tools into that game, right? So at the gallery, I mean, Science Gallery Bengaluru, which is of which I'm now tasked with the responsibility to establish, we look at building a bridge between research in the human, natural, and social sciences, so rigorous research that comes from knowledge-making disciplines, and the public, right? So, because research happens in the most, unfortunate circumstances behind walls, where access to the public is absent. And so to build that wall and to bring knowledge back into culture, in a sense, because to bring science back into culture is our vision statement, because that's where it belongs. Taxpayer money is paying for it. And this is also something, actually, we need to kind of keep in mind, why do we want science back in culture? Why do we want knowledge to have a relationship with culture? Why do we want to understand the place and space of science in everyday life, or knowledge in everyday life? It's important because, at the end of the day, if we don't have an understanding of knowledge, of what the taxpayer is paying for, right? In many ways, we lose out on building that life of the mind, right? Like the dignity of knowledge, the dignity of knowing is not accrued or is not given to all of us. And I think that is the role that the Science Gallery wishes to play. And if you look at comparable institutions across the world, if you look at museums in London, you look at, museums in London, of course, are free. In England, they are free for everyone to come in. In many other places, they're heavily subsidized. So if you look at even the United States and say just the complex that I'm most familiar with, which is the complex of the Smithsonian institutions, which are also research-based spaces for public interaction, 71 to 75% of their funding is federal, right?
Yes.
Because such spaces do not function on a regular business revenue model where you can generate, you become sustainable, as is, and this is something I've always said for both education as well as culture, which is that one cannot approach it as if it is a business, because it is not a business, right? Exactly. Businesses must be run like businesses because they are businesses, but everything is not a business, right? And investment into future generations is not a business model, because you want better citizens to, be able to function in a society, contribute their best, be their best, realize their best. And I think that is, these are a cluster of ideas that nestle around what Science Gallery Bengaluru as one institution should be doing. But, we nestle ourselves in a set of institutions, which is an ecosystem of educational institutions, cultural institutions, research institutions that contribute to each other, that speak to each other in order for knowledge to find its place in society. And it's something, and the last point that I want to make is that this is especially important in a society like India, where we have, for millennia, lived very comfortable with the idea that knowledge is not for everyone. And I think that is sort of, the crack through which the light now leads to seep in.
Yeah, I must say that's the vision statement map as well talks about how the whole purpose of art, what are we trying to do through art? It is to help us discover our humanity and develop a deeper understanding of the world we live in. So Arundhati, I really wanted you to add.
Yeah, just to say that, you talked about, to go back to your question on technology and art, and working with IFA for the past over 2 decades, one has seen hundreds of proposals come to us, artists wanting to work with technology. And I have seen 3 key roles being played by technology. And I must say, all the institutes that here, I have the directors sitting with me, they in their own way actually look at all these 3 roles that technology plays. The first one has been when technology enhances the art form itself. So imagine a lights designer is working on a specific kind of model for lighting, which will change depending on how a dancer moves on stage. That not only enhances the light itself, but the dance takes on a new form. And so that's one kind of way in which one has seen artists use technology. The second is when it enhances the experience of the audience. So at MAP, and at IME, I have seen ways in which hologram or audio guides or different kinds of technological innovations have actually enhanced the audience's experience of that cultural engagement. And the third one, which I feel is absolutely important if we are going to talk about a city being a cultural capital, is about who is not in this room? Are we excluding anybody? How much of inclusivity and access can we build for the cultural engagements we are talking about? And this, I don't mean, when we say accessibility, we only think of people with physical disabilities. So we put a ramp and we put Braille on 3 out of the 3,000 artworks we have in our museum, and we say we are accessible. But accessibility is in terms of language. Accessibility is in terms of the clothes you wear. Accessibility is in terms of whether a space is open to you if you visibly are a transgender person. One has had this experience where a program for which a transgender community was putting up a play, they were not allowed into the cultural space because they looked transgender. And they were asked to stay away because the management or the people responsible for entrance thought they had come there to beg. So what does accessibility mean? Can we have technology make our cultural engagements more accessible? And that's the third role that one has seen technology play.
Absolutely. Manasi, would you like to add to this idea of accessibility that she talked about? How can we use technology to be more accessible? Because we've done a lot at MAP as well, but I'd like you first to talk about that, and then we can take that further.
Sure, and I think that one of the core reasons why experience of art and experience of culture is important is because in an ideal world, culture allows us to see another perspective. When you, in the words of Paulo Coelho, culture enables us to understand each other better. And by watching a performance of dance or theater or music or visual art, one is able to experience the world from a different perspective that in turn perhaps will inculcate values of being more inclusive, more open to perspectives other than our own, which in turn hopefully will lead to a good or a better society. However, traditionally, yes, access to the arts itself has been the privilege of a select few. Talking about music, the music that I practice, Carnatic music, has for a long time been the privilege of a certain class or a caste of society at either the active or may not be deliberate, in some cases perhaps deliberate, but it is true that large sections of society have been left out from the ability to experience, learn and practice arts. How can we break these barriers? And this is where I believe that institutions can play a huge role. Coming to the Indian music experience itself, I think right from the very beginning, we believed that inclusion and accessibility is a value that we need to believe in very strongly and practice. This could be in simple things. For example, around the world, museums are considered to be very sort of high-class spaces, not meant for a person from a normal middle-class background to easily access. Where does that start? The first thing is language. If you walk into a space and you see all the boards in English, highly sanitized environments, everything is, extremely high-end in terms of design, and are these things allowing for someone, a child from a government school, to come and feel comfortable in a space like this? Perhaps not. So it starts with things like language. At our institution, for example, all signage is bilingual. It's in English and Kannada, which means that a child from a government school can come in and at least feel immediately that this is a space that can speak to me. Yes, design of physical spaces, ramps, elevators, these are extremely important. But in addition, it is also about actively reaching out to communities who may not have necessarily walked into the space themselves. At the IME, for example, one of the flagship community outreach programs that we instituted is called Project Swarita, where children from socially disadvantaged as well as neurodivergent backgrounds, children with autism and other intellectual disabilities, are brought to the museum because they may not end up coming there on their own. So the role of the institution is not just in saying we are open to everybody, but actively reaching out to the community and saying, hey, come in, because guess what? That will make your space better. It's not just about the community that you're impacting, but the institution's perspective itself is enriched because of the fact that you have people from various backgrounds walking through its portals, contributing to curation, to creation, to programming. And this is the way I think that especially new institutions which don't have the baggage that perhaps traditional institutions have, we can make a difference. And I think that's absolutely essential in order to make culture more inclusive.
So just to add one small thing about IMing, because I have experienced it myself and with many people that I've taken there, I think one fact of making something accessible is to include fun. Because the moment you include things that are fun, that can immediately be accessed by a wide range of people. So, you know, the little photo booths that you have, which are just like amazing backdrops in front of which I can pretend to be a musician or a Maharani, sit there listening to a gramophone. It excites me as well as someone that I'm taking there who's 11 years old and who may not be already very interested in music, but finds it great fun to play with all the musical instruments you have in the outdoors.
Yeah.
So the fact that in the arts we are constantly taking ourselves so seriously and into a complete intellectual language and experience which already makes us so niche, a little bit of breaking out of that to include fun could be one of the ways to become accessible.
Absolutely, Arundhati, because when we look at art, who is art created by? Art is created by everyday people. It's so difficult to understand why has this elitist tag to it, because everything that we see is usually created by our artisans, our people from humble backgrounds. If you look at some of our leading artists, if you look at M.F. Hussain, if you look at Ara was a car cleaner. M.F. Hussain was a man who painted sign posters. I mean, so to me, art is a right. It's not a privilege, and that's what it should be. So as Arundhati was talking about the fact of accessibility, did I hear a bell? No, okay. So you know, when we're talking about accessibility at MAP, it was not only about the physical accessibility that you talked about. Of course, we had our consultants called DEOC, which is the Diversity and Equal Opportunities Center. So they guided us on a lot of things, on not just the ramps and all of this, the wheelchairs, but also how do you look at people with mental disabilities? How do you make your space welcoming to everybody? What are the kinds of surfaces that you use in your organization? What are the surfaces of the lifts? What are the windows that you have in your doors, the panels that you see through? What is the level at which the buttons on your lift can be pressed at? On your website, what are the kinds of fonts that you use? What are the color contrasts? What is the alt text that you have? All of this, I think, is looking at technology and seeing how you can make everyone feel welcome at MAP or is able to access the content that you have at MAP. So, but I think also what we're looking at is, are we inclusive in terms of what we offer to our public? And just to give you an idea of what MAP has to offer, in its collection, it has pre-modern, it has modern and contemporary, it has textiles, which most museums have, but it also has photography, which is hardly recognized really as an art form in most museums. How many museums have photography in their collection? What about indigenous art or living traditions, what we call living traditions, which is commonly reduced to folk and tribal art? That's also very much a part of the MAP collection. And we also have popular culture. So what is popular culture? Popular culture is Bollywood posters, lobby cards, calendar art. All of this is what is seen as mass culture. But it's important that this is also reflected in the collection, because when people then walk into the museum, they feel, oh, some part of my life is reflected in this space. And that's when they're able to connect with the collection. So I think it's important to be inclusive in that way as well. I remember in our permanent exhibition, we were looking at who are the communities that are also represented in the artworks that we have in this space. So are there people, you know, from marginalized communities? Okay, we've done an exhibition on women perhaps, but do we have the voices of different communities represented? As she said, do we have the transgender community? Looking at all, do we have work that is representative of everyone? Is everyone's voice heard in this museum? And I think that is important also to see that we are a platform for voices that are marginalized. And we work really hard at that as well. But would you like to enter that discussion?
Just a small footnote, right? So accessibility to what we've already produced and what we've put out there. But also I think we, as public institutions, we also hold the responsibility, as cultural spaces, we also hold the responsibility to create space for that which is not yet wanted, right? So pedagogy for the public, or public education as one might call it in a rather more old-fashioned way, is also a responsibility we hold, right? So so democratization of instruction, of culture, or which is more inclusive in terms of what it represents, but also inclusive in terms of who it actually brings in, is important. But equally important, I think, is to create the space for that which is not yet imagined, or that which can be imagined, right? And I think that is where, at least we see us, we see our role as sort of, growing stronger, simply because that is the kind of pedagogy that's missing. If you look at the sort of, how should I call it, the lineage or the genealogy of a space like Science Gallery, the very first public institutions that dealt with knowledge in the public domain were museums. Science museums, right? I mean, we call them science museums now, but they were museums of collections of natural history with plants and animals and samples of all kinds. And, the wonderful thing about it, which is what I've been trying my best to actually find a way to realize in the new location, is that the museum was both a space for research as well as a space for the public. So the public could come in and see, okay, so these are parakeets from Southern America, these are, fishes from somewhere else, and this is, in my backyard, etc. So you see the array of natural life in a museum space. There are researchers in the same space who are studying those samples and those collections, right? So the public had not only a view on the object of inquiry, scientific inquiry into knowledge, but they also had a relationship to it. And they had a relationship to the people who actually worked in those spaces. That has since lost, because the very nature of knowledge production has changed in the last 100-odd years, as a result of which today we don't have that relationship anymore. Where is science in the everyday, right? I mean, you might pick up your mobile phone and say, oh yeah, here's technology. But I think that distinction between knowledge making, the place of sort of applications of knowledge in day-to-day life, etc., and those, what do those distinctions mean to how I lead my life? And that's where the pedagogy for the public is an equal responsibility in a democratic polity, in a democratic system, that we have a citizenry that is well informed, such that they are able to make better decisions in their day-to-day life, be it, in the cultural domain, be it in their personal lives, be it decisions on what kind of medical treatment they want, for example, right? And these are not, and I think this is the key thing, which is why, Science Gallery belongs firmly also on this panel, is that making a decision on whether CRISPR-Cas has an implication on my life or not is not a scientific decision. It is a cultural and personal and social decision in terms of what are the implications of this for future society, right? For future social relations, for, so I think those questions, so knowledge belongs firmly in the domain of culture, and making that visible is also the work that we carry with ourselves. So yes, representation, yes, democracy in terms of inclusion, I think those are no-brainers. We have to do them. We haven't done enough. But also making space for that which is not yet wanted, not yet visualized, not yet imagined. Creating that, I think, is a sort of more deeper, stronger responsibility that we also carry.
So just talking about citizenship, we've talked a lot, and it's funny. So for our arts education program at IFA, we have said we are not interested in good citizens. We are interested in arts education making critical citizens. Citizens who can question governments, we can ask power the right kind of questions, who does not need to constantly fear the other, and also citizens who know what their rights are as much as they are told by powers that be what their responsibilities are. So that is also what the arts constantly needs to do in terms. So we talked a lot about the responsibility of the citizen as demanding these things from the city, as finding out what is there. But unless a child from a very young age is exposed to the arts and to what kind of critical minds arts training, arts pedagogies, opening out the world of the arts can do for that child is to create not an obedient mind, but a critical mind which is not afraid to ask the most difficult questions. I think that's also something all of us share in in what we put out there as cultural engagements.
Okay. Since we've reached close to the end, I want us to all give our closing comments. And looking at it from the prism of, since we come to the citizen and the institution and the government, how has Bangalore survived all these years without too much of institutional support? How have artists and collectives kept the whole cultural conversation going? And also how important it is in the way forward to look at what does the government need to do to energize this space, and how can we create private and public partnership to really combine our resources for the betterment of both the city and for the larger country at hand, you know? So if you'd like to begin, Manasi.
Sure. So I do really believe, and this is not, I'm not just saying it because I'm on this panel, but Bangalore has a lot of these critical ingredients that are needed to make a truly culturally vibrant city. That it has a critical mass of artists and artists from different disciplines, just talking about music, be it from Carnatic to Hindustani to Sugama Sangeeta to Janapada to various representations of film industries, both Hindi and Kannada and everything else in between, a thriving independent music scene of artists. So the artists are there. I do believe audiences are there because Bangalore, being a cosmopolitan city, has people from different walks of life who would gravitate to different kinds of the arts. So the audience is there. Spaces are there. There could be a lot more. And what I would like to see more of, hopefully by 2040 or sooner, would be mushrooming of more art spaces all over the city. There needs to be more Sarjapur Sangeet Sabhas and Whitefield cultural centers and North Bangalore spaces for the arts, and so that we don't have to come to the heart of the city for everything. And every suburb, every neighborhood needs to have spaces to engage with the arts. Support for the arts. Yes, the government has a role to play. The government has a role to play in everything. And sadly, the government can't play a role in everything, while we would, of course, need more support from the government for the arts. But again, I come back to what can happen outside the government. If the Brigade Group could support the setup of the Indian Music Experience Museum, if various corporates can support the setup of sporting or cultural institutions, I'm sure we can see a lot more of that happening in the city. In fact, every artist sometimes is forced into the role of being an arts manager or an arts entrepreneur just because there is nobody else supporting the arts. Yeah. So, but I don't necessarily consider that a bad thing. I think it's going to need all these factors to come together. And I will again end with you and me. Open the newspaper, open Deccan Herald, see what is happening in your part of the city. Support the arts, support artists. It is in our hands to make Bangalore the thriving cultural city. If we want to see it, let us be part of the change.
Thank you.
You know, long before we were told, artists have always been Atmanirbhar, especially in Bangalore, because you just see the number of artist-led spaces, collectives, initiatives. Bangalore is like a model, I think, when I go to Bombay or Delhi, where there's a lot more funding either from the government or from the corporate sector. I keep talking about Bangalore because this is the city where really the spirit of the artist is the most visible in everything that we see. And I hope in the future, all kinds of support be given to the artist, because no matter what we say about audience or other things, unless the figure of the artist, the musician, the theatre maker, the filmmaker is supported fully by society, by government, by all kinds of philanthropic activities, you will not have anything to celebrate. So that's my last sort of leaving comment.
Jahnavi?
So as you know, you're aware, and probably many people in this room are aware, Science Gallery Bengaluru is a public-private partnership where the government and private philanthropy have come together to establish an institution that reflects the fact that, Bangalore is seen today as the science city of India, the new science city of India. At the turn of the last century, it used to be Calcutta, and now it's Bangalore. And so the way I see it, having worked with both the government and private philanthropy, I think that is a good way to go forward. This is the kind of project that is possible in this city for Science Gallery Bengaluru, but also other projects, because there is energy, there are resources, and I think we still sort of, we have cultural institutions that are coming up and that have already been there. We have a number of incredible research institutions in this city, some of them leading institutions of the country, right? And so I think that is going to make possible a certain kind of cultural identity of the city going forward. Bangalore has always dealt with, I think even in the historical past, the sort of division between the cantonment and the old city. And now you have not only that, but you have electronic city. And as I used to call it, I'm a relative new entrant to the city. I've been here for 5 years. And when I arrived, I used to say, electronic city and white city. White field is what I meant. And so in a sense, Bangalore is used to having parts of itself and still being able to realize and project forward. And often, what I say is that we are all familiar with the dust of the old. There is also the dust of the new, which is yet to settle. And I think before we allow it to settle, we might do some interesting things, such that going forward, we all feel, that we have done our best to help the city realize its potential. And, it could be as a citizen, it could be as a cultural producer, it could be as an artist, it could be as a scientist, it could be, no matter who you are, you have something that you can bring to the table.
Okay, so I want to end with sharing with you one piece of information that you may find surprising. When we looked at the budgets of the government for 2021, the amount that the government set aside for culture was 0.1% of the budget. And the corporate sector was not far better, it was 0.8%. That was a study that we commissioned. And those were the findings. So what is the priority that we as citizens or as communities or as the government are setting aside for culture? So I think the important thing is to realize, first of all, the value of culture to us, and then to give it the priority that it needs, and to bring together, I think, the strengths that both have, the energy, perhaps the capital, and the know-how from the private sector, and the fact and the strengths of the government, that the government is the representative of the people, and all of the strength that they can bring to bring about a change. So I think we can hope to be catalysts and look at a change for our communities and for our country. So thank you very much for listening to us. Good afternoon.